Hi guys, welcome to another 31 Days of Halloween recap video. This is number 5, I do believe. Recapping films 96 to 115. Holy guacamole. My voice hurts just thinking about it. Anywho, yeah, like I've said, hopefully you've seen the other recaps. I'm sorry that I didn't get around to doing all of them in October. I just could not fit in taking an entire day to make and edit one of these videos. It just totally would have cut into my movie watching time, and I was already very, very behind, at least behind where I was last year. So, enough of that. That's not what's important. You're here to hear about some movies, so let me tell you about the movies. At number 96 was Killer Legends, a 2014 American documentary written and directed by Joshua Zimmerman. In it, director Zimmerman and researcher Rochelle Millis investigate the real-life origins of several urban legends. This was a fascinating documentary. It's partly a documentary on urban legends and partly a crime documentary, which makes all the more interesting to watch. It specifically looks at the legends of the Hookman, the Candyman, the Babysitter, and the Man Upstairs, and the Killer Clown. Stories that have many incarnations and have inspired many stories and films to be made based on them or inspired by them. But what started the legends? It's amazing how in reality many of these legends originated from real-life crimes in small towns, and most of those crimes were either unsolved or it is strongly believed that the real perpetrator got away with it, both of which are unpleasant thoughts. I love the investigative work, I said that word successfully, that went into this documentary, and while many of the stories or crimes are ones I personally knew about, it was interesting seeing them from a different perspective. Number 97, Killer Mermaid, also known as Mamula or Nymph, is a 2014 Serbian fantasy horror film directed by Milan Todorovic with a screenplay by Barry Keating and Milan Konjevic from a story by Marko Pakovic. In it, 2 young American women go on a Mediterranean vacation and uncover the watery lair of a killer mermaid hidden beneath an abandoned military fortress. What was once a carefree adventure becomes a deadly fight for survival. This film goes for an hour and a half, and we don't see a single mermaid until after the 40-minute mark. The English titles are honestly very misleading, and frankly, so is the synopsis. The mermaid eats people, sure, but she doesn't really go around killing anyone. She has a hypnotized dude who, from the start of the film, goes around killing people and chopping them up and feeding them to the mermaid. The UK title is Killer Mermaids, which spoils the ending for UK viewers because at the end of the film we kind of see a group of mermaids swimming to avenge their fallen sister, kind of hinting at a sequel. I am obsessed with mermaids, but frankly, I'm really tired of horror films using this version of stories about sirens, which is basically what these mermaids are, since their song seduces men only, which again is dumb. In mythology, sirens were not actually mermaids. Originally, sirens were depicted or believed to be part woman, part bird. It wasn't until centuries later the depiction of sirens changed, mostly when Christianity came into play, turning sirens into an allegory about prostitutes or women in general, being able to control man's reason or lure them into sin or poverty. And then after that, sirens morphed into these beautiful mermaids, half women, half fish, and they were stunning and beautiful, and in many tales when mermaid stories began, they had the voice of a siren and lured men to a watery grave. I say this because this film makes reference to the original story of sirens, even naming the island they supposedly lived on, Sirenum Scopuli, yet used the modern depiction of a siren, which is a mermaid. It combined the details of the original story but modern imagery, which so many films do, especially horror films, and I guess it's because mermaids have more appeal. I mean, look at me, I'm obsessed with them, but I'm really fed up and just once wish if they were going to use the original story of a siren, then they were depicting them in their original form just once. I don't mind too much when they're just called mermaids in the film, but when they start specifically calling them sirens or hinting at them being sirens, that's when I get annoyed. Aside from that, it's just mostly pretty boring until like the last 20 minutes. Number 98, Killer Sofa, a 2019 New Zealand horror comedy film written and directed by Bernie Rao. In it, a killer reclining chair becomes enchanted by a girl and starts committing crimes of passion. Now, I love films like Attack of the Killer Donuts, Attack of the Killer Condoms, dumbass films that make no sense but are super entertaining because they are fully aware of what they are. That's what I was hoping this was. I was fully prepared for some dumb fun, and I didn't get that. I appreciate this film using a different culture to explain demons, spirits, or possession. In this case, the film talks about it from the eyes of Jewish mythology, referring to spirits as a dibuk. Last time, and maybe the only time I saw a film use this approach instead of the overused Christian depiction, was 2012's The Possession, where a young girl comes into possession of a box that in fact contained a dibuk, and the father seeks the help of a Hasidic rabbi. Aside from that, I can't think off the top of my head another time I've seen this approach, so I really love that. It's good to look at other cultures because we can tell the same stories, but when we look at those stories through different cultures, the stories change, and not in a bad way. But the plot or logic the script tries to provide for why there is a killer chair is very confusing, and they try to do too much to explain it, to the point where it's a story within a story, and I couldn't follow it, and I was getting confused, and at that point it just seemed to distract away from the fact there is a recliner going around killing people. I was content to just accept some psycho died in the chair and now his soul lives in it and he kills people for fun, or kills people because he is in love with the owner. That would have been enough instead of what we got. I really didn't see enough fun killer sofa action. It started off good but then lost its way, sadly. Number 99, Christy, a 2014 American horror thriller film directed by Oliver Blackburn and written by Anthony Joswinski. The plot follows a college student who stays on campus alone over Thanksgiving break and finds herself terrorized by a cult of ritual killers. I watched this because I adore Ashley Greene, who is one of the villains, and she was fantastic in that role, very creepy, and Haley Bennett was great as the protagonist. I love how there is development to her character. She starts off on the defensive, running, hiding, trying to get away and get help, and when that keeps backfiring, she realizes she has no choice but to go on the offensive. Do or die, and she stops and actually starts thinking and starts putting her smarts to work and is able to take out her attackers one by one, not using brute force, well, maybe one, but using her brain, and I love that. The idea of a group of people terrorizing and killing someone isn't new, and this film certainly didn't have them do anything that wasn't unexpected. They all behave how you'd expect. The only difference, and it's what I didn't enjoy, was making them a cult. They're a cyber cult situated all over the US, killing Christies and vlogging about it. So basically the name Christy derives from the Latin meaning follower of God, apparently. No, this main character's name isn't Christy, but they keep calling her that. Why? Because for these nut jobs, it's not that they attack people named Christy, it's that they attack people, women, who embody what they think a Christy is, which is someone young, beautiful, kind, and fortunate. Basically, they're a cult-killing anti-Karens, and I guess the opposite of a Karen is a Christy? Yep, this is the central plot, and I just could not get into it. Cult killing people, okay, but the why is just utterly ridiculous to me. Number 100, Quion, a 1965 Japanese anthology horror film directed by Masaki Kobayashi from a screenplay by Yoko Mizuki based on stories and studies of strange things by Lafcadio Hearn. The film consists of 4 separate and unrelated stories. It's about 2.5 hours long, and it felt longer. Some of the stories were interesting, some not so interesting. Except for the last one, as I was watching the stories play out, their endings were all very obvious. I think what I enjoyed the most was watching how a film from 1960s Japan used lighting to depict its ghostly characters and how to draw attention to certain things within the scene. It was almost like how something might be done on the stage. So overall, it was pretty fascinating. Only story I didn't enjoy was the last one. Number 101, Lake Mungo, a 2008 Australian psychological mockumentary horror film written and directed by Joel Anderson. The film follows a family trying to come to terms with the drowning death of their daughter and the potentially supernatural events they experience after her death. This is probably the most Australian film I have seen in a long time. Where I called The Loved Ones basically an American bastardization of what Australia is, this is Australia down to its core. Yes, it's a story about a small family in a rural place in Australia, but it's actually set and filmed in those locations, so it works. We see small towns and locations that definitely feel and look Australian and are shown in their most honest form, even down to the house. The homes of people they interview are all different. Some a bit more modern, while others are older styles of Australian homes, and again, that's very Australia. You can walk down my road and you'll find the new ultra-modern, freshly built houses, or you'll find the houses that have been there for decades practically unchanged. My house is over 60 years old, but it's been touched up. This film uses the perfect blend of found footage to sell the mockumentary. It really feels like watching a current affairs special from the 90s. This looked like something I've seen on TV that was real and authentic. It's like watching on TV them talk to experts and eyewitnesses discussing the Lindy Chamberlain case. It feels so convincing, I sometimes forgot it was fake. The performances were all amazing. I saw some criticism of a lack of script, but I think how they went about this worked. It feels more like people in the moment responding to questions instead of having them planned and practiced. These felt like real Australian families. I about died when they showed the picture of a supposed young Alice sitting in a laundry trough for a bath. That's the most Australian thing I have ever seen. That's how I used to have baths when I was little and we ran out of hot water. Same with my brother and my sister. I'm sure you can ask any person who grew up in Australia before the year 2000 and most, not all, but most will say they had a bath in the laundry trough because water heaters used to suck. Ours still does. Either way, that was hilarious and spot on. But to talk about the story, is this a ghost story? No. This is more a story about a family dealing with their own personal ghosts. The ghost really is grief. Not truly being able to let go and move on, finding reasons to keep holding on, and that sadness and realization that comes with learning things about someone who has passed that make you feel like you never knew them or never got to know them. And that compounds on the grief as you realize you'll never get that. It's best to let things go because the more you dig, the more you'll find questions that you can never have answered. I found this storyline about a young girl who essentially is haunted by her own future death quite fascinating. Almost this idea that grief can be so strong it can move backwards through time. It's a bit complex but interesting. I, however, didn't like the story about the sex tape. I don't think it provided any layers to the characters or the central storyline. I think it was rather pointless and distracting. It becomes a situation of maybe one too many ideas, and instead of picking which was best, using them all, and I think that's the film's only fault. Minus this one aspect, I think the film would have been perfect from beginning to end. I think the editing was brilliant, the found footage elements were brilliant, for sure looked like old home movies I have, and the old phone videos, yep, looks like old phones used to film in the dark, which is something they sucked at doing back when this was all taking place. It all worked for the story and was really interesting, and if you are someone who enjoyed playing Spot the Ghost in The Haunting of Hill House, then you might get a kick out of this movie and spotting the apparitions hidden in the background. Number 102, Last Shift, a 2014 American psychological horror film directed by Anthony DiBlasi and written by DiBlasi and Scott Poyley. In it, a rookie police officer who is tasked with taking the last shift at a police station before it is permanently closed. Strange events lead her to believe that it may be haunted. I think what frustrates me is at the end, I still can't tell if any of what happened or if it was all a hallucination, and I hate endings like that. I don't want to think there's a chance I watched an entire film watching something that technically never happened. It frustrates me. Like those endings for films and television where it was all a dream, those suck. I think Juliana Harkavy gives a stellar performance, no doubt about that. There are certainly some effectively creepy moments in this film, but for me, it's too much like a million other films, and films that basically take inspiration from Manson and his cult kind of bug me. I mean, so many films have tried to make films about cults that kill people, and while cults exist all over the world, it's easy to see which ones in films are taken from real life cults and which are made up. This one feels very inspired by Manson, and that's just boring to me. That man and his deeds have been glorified way too much at this point. Number 103, Leprechaun Returns, a 2018 American television comedy horror film directed by Steven Kostanski and written by Suzanne Keeley. It's the 8th installment in the Leprechaun film series and a direct sequel to the original 1993 Leprechaun film. The Leprechaun returns once again when a group of girls unwillingly awaken him after they tear down a cabin so they can build a new sorority house. Can people proofread the synopsises when people write them? I keep the synopsises the same so that I can correct them in my reviews. So, first of all, it's a house, not a cabin, and they're not tearing it down, they're updating and refitting it so it's eco-friendly. Good on Lyndon Porco for trying, but there's just no way you can beat Warwick Davis when it comes to portraying this horror character. They tried to keep to his mythology, keep his quirks, even down to the shoes and rhyming, but it just felt extremely stiff. All of the dialogue and most of the performances were stiff with no life in them to make them interesting. I like the concept for how it ties into the first film, but it almost seems to forget that itself. I mean, this is a sorority house moving into the family home of the character of Lila, and yet she never mentions it, nor do they seem aware. Considering they're going on and on about this house and being disrespectful at times, I'd be throwing out the, hey, this was my family's house, you know. The Leprechaun's gold looked hilariously cheap, and really the only two performances that I thought were any good were from Taylor Spritler and Pepe Sonuga, our two survivors. The rest were super annoying and stale characters with flat performances. I think it's frustrating that they kill him repeatedly in this film by all methods that basically worked in the first film, and yet he comes back instantly each time. So it doesn't care that much about mythology. This film seems to have forgotten until it had 20 minutes to go that this was also meant to be a comedy, so it starts throwing in comedic scenes and lines, especially one-liners, and the scenes weren't funny. And the one-liners got annoying fast, just an incredibly dull and bland installment to the franchise, but it was a decent concept. Number 104, The Lodge, a 2019 psychological horror film directed by Veronica Franz and Severin Fiala and written by Franz Fiala and Sergio Casci. Its plot follows a soon-to-be stepmother who, alone with her fiancé's two children, becomes stranded at their rural lodge during Christmas. There, she and the children experience a number of unexplained events that seem to be connected to her past in a suicide cult. For the first hour, I hated the character of the father, and I hated the stepmother on principle. By the end of the film, I hated absolutely everyone. By the time the credits roll, I didn't care about how it ended because I no longer cared about a single character. Everyone sucked. But at least I could understand the children to a degree. The father is the scum of the earth. He cheats on his wife and then leaves her, resulting in her severe depression and suicide, and feeling no guilt or remorse, almost demands his children to get along with the woman who destroyed their family. He's a selfish prick. Also, how bad must your marriage be to leave your caring wife for a mentally unstable, pill-popping former cult member? Seriously? To make him even worse, he takes everyone to the lodge he shared with his now dead wife, still filled with her things, then he abandons his children with a woman they openly loathe. It's also clear right away this woman is not stable and should probably not be left to care for two children, so Dad is more of a douchebag to care so little for his kids he'd leave them with an unstable person, and we see how well that worked out. What we think is either a case of a haunting or insanity turns out to be gaslighting. The children, furious with their father and still grieving the death of their mother, want justice and are taking it out on the woman they feel is responsible, which she kind of is. Now, I would have gone with cut up her clothes, put dog shit in her bed, I don't know, anything but what they did. What they did went beyond justice. It was damn near psychotic and very sadistic. They hid her pills, very dumb thing to do to anyone. Hid everything in the house, make fake photos and flyers, and try to convince stepmom to be. They all died in a gas leak, and after staging a fake suicide and accidentally freezing her dog to death, she officially snaps and believes it to the point she becomes homicidal. Great job, kids. At the end of the day, no one was good. Everyone is a sinner, but I still believe had the father not been a selfish and unfaithful prick, had he been caring and been there for his children and given them the love and support they needed during their grief instead of forcing them into a situation they were mentally not ready for and vehemently against, none of the film's events would have happened. Especially wouldn't have happened if he hadn't left them alone with an unstable woman who does that. So while everyone sucks, I blame Dad the most. Number 105, Lost Gully Road, a 2017 Australian thriller directed by Donna McRae and written by McRae and Michael Vale. Lucy travels to an isolated house in the forest to wait for her sister. They have worked out a risky scheme for their future, and all she needs to do is sit it out. However, a sinister presence may have something different in mind. If you like slow burn suspense films that put you into the mental state of the lead, then this one is for you. Admittedly, there's virtually nothing going on for most of the film, hints here and there, but nothing solid until the end of the film. The film is great at making the audience feel the same sense of isolation our main character feels, and our frustration grows with her. Strange things slowly begin to happen, and we're not quite sure what to make of it. Is the place haunted, or is she slowly going mad? There are a few nods to the classic Red Riding Hood tale, nothing too dramatic, but this image of the girl in the hooded coat heading to Grandma's place in the woods only to find the big bad wolf inside, you can see how this film does actually take that idea and put a very modern and more sinister spin to it. It goes from a film questioning the character's mental state to flipping the script and feeling like the Australian version of The Entity, which I don't mind because there are subtle clues in certain scenes allowing you to understand what is happening and why. The lead gives a hell of a performance given she has no one to play off of and virtually no dialogue for most of the film. My only major con is the phone conversations between herself and her sister. They're scheming something, but we have no idea what it is or why. It's like they're speaking in code. The sister keeps calling only to say the same thing over and over again, like 20 times during each call. All she says is, I can't come yet, you have to stay there, this is what we agreed, and don't turn on your phone, he can trace it, this will all work. This is what is said during every single phone call and multiple times during each call that I would have gone insane too. While the score is eerie and reflects the film's atmosphere, the fact it's the same composition playing in every single eerie moment was actually extremely annoying. First it was effective, second time was cute, third time I was fed up, and so every time it showed up I was getting frustrated. That aside, great film and a very underappreciated little Aussie thriller gem. Number 106, The Luring, a 2020 American horror thriller written and directed by Christopher Wells. In it, a man tries to recover a lost memory by returning to his family's Vermont vacation home where an unspeakable act took place, leaving him institutionalized as a child. The opening scene was great and interesting, then the rest was utter horseshit. This film really doesn't have a plot, the story makes no sense, the opening and closing scenes connect to the central plot in no way, shape or form, the acting on behalf of the women is awful, with the lead male only being fractionally better but not redeemable. But what was worse than the plot was the dialogue. It was horrifically cringeworthy to the point if these people were real, you'd shake them screaming, "Do you hear yourself when you speak?" Oh boy. There were words being said, but nothing meant anything, it was just words. The lead character is an egotistical asshole who you want to punch in the throat, and on top of that, he's a sociopath. And if you wonder if it's a phase, flashbacks of his childhood show he's been this way forever. His relationship is beyond toxic, with him being emotionally abusive towards his girlfriend, and her being the eternal doormat and always crying and apologizing to him for him insulting her for no reason. While yes, she is annoying, she's not a bad person, but she is painfully idiotic. She's expecting a proposal from a man who all but says the words, "I fucking hate your guts and never loved you." This film is a poor man's cheap knockoff of The Shining, only with no quality to it whatsoever. Now, I can't stand The Shining, but I'd prefer it over this. This isn't just a Shining knockoff, it's a Stephen King knockoff. Aside from the alleged house that turns this dude homicidal with ghosts getting him drunk and talking to him, there's the non-stop appearance of a red balloon, and at one point a random clown shows up out of nowhere. On stilts! So, haunted building encouraging you to be homicidal, female partner hunted down afterwards, red balloon and clown. This ringing any bells for anyone? Number 107, Macabre, aka Macabro, a 1980 Italian horror film directed by Lamberto Bava, with a screenplay and story by Bava, Pupi Avati, Roberto Gandus, and Antonio Avati. In it, a middle-aged woman traumatized from the death of her adulterous lover moves into a room at a New Orleans boarding house where the blind landlord becomes suspicious to her activities of continuing her affair with her dead lover. Well, this has it all, folks. Neglect, adultery, insanity, manslaughter, fratricide, filicide, and even necrophilia. I think the story surrounding the mother is a very interesting one. The way it all plays out between her and the blind guy feels Rear Window meets Psycho in a way. I actually really liked her story, though she is totally winning Worst Wife and Mother of the Year. Outside that, I feel it tries to do too much. The story concerning the daughter is confusing. I thought perhaps she kills her brother in a messed up attempt to bring her parents together, not that that works. But nope, this kid just seems like a genuine psycho, and I think we have too many in this film. Then there is a shocking ending that, while you don't see coming, has no logic to it whatsoever and will leave you scratching your head. It's a fun film for sure, but a tad confusing and one too many plots. Number 108, May the Devil Take You, better known as Sebelum Iblis Menjempat, a 2018 Indonesian horror film written and directed by Timo Tjahjanto. The story follows Alfie, who, when trying to find answers to her father's mysterious illness, visits his old house and finds out events from his past. It's not quite at the level Pengabdi-Setan was, and it certainly didn't scare me. I think it overdoes it a bit to the point most of what happens isn't effective anymore, but that being said, I love the story. The performances are great, and overall it's just a really fun supernatural film about making deals with the devil. There were a few scenes where it reminded me a lot of Drag Me to Hell, and I'm wondering if some inspiration came from that, just translated into an Indonesian film. So while not scary, it is very entertaining, but for me it's the story that made me keep watching, which is good. I think that there's more to learn as we go, even when there are things easy to guess. Number 109, Mermaid Down, a 2019 American fantasy horror film directed by Jeffrey Grellman and written by Grellman and Kelly Lauren Baker. In it, a mermaid is ripped from the Pacific, her tail is chopped off, and she's thrown into a mental home where no one believes she is a mermaid. This is not The Little Mermaid, folks, not by a long shot. Its biggest faults are trying to do too much and yet only half explaining most of what it does. The biggest pro is that it's actually a lot of fun. I love mermaid movies, I've said this before, and this I got a big kick out of. Props to Alexandra Bokova for giving a good performance with no dialogue, well done to her. I don't know why the fishermen believe in mermaids, I'm also amazed they actually caught one, but is their logic of cutting off the tail to sell unrealistic? No, fishermen cut off the fins of sharks and toss the sharks back into the ocean to die, so yes, that is very logical. Though I think a living mermaid would be worth a lot more in my mind. I love that the fishermen at least believe a mermaid and a siren isn't the same thing. That's a great addition. Now enter sadistic psychiatrist. He says very little, he does very little until going on a random killing spree. Very little is fleshed out about him, and it's a shame because there was something there. He's a sadistic serial killer who uses his facility as a hunting pool. He tortures and kills his own patients, and for him, a mermaid is just an extra exciting new plaything to torment and dissect. This film even has a ghost, a former patient who doesn't know she's a ghost, so I guess she still needs therapy. While yes, this is a bit much, I like the idea of mermaids being able to see ghosts. That's a nice twist in the mythology. Another is the mermaid having parts of her hair that light up. This is explained as something similar to anglerfish in that the light it either allows them to see in the depths or is used to attract fish to them to eat, which again is very logical. After all, she is half fish and lives in the ocean. They gave some backstory on the dying out of her species, and I was on board for that too. So yeah, parts of the story could use some revision and fleshed out some things better, but overall some great elements in there and some dark mermaid fun. Number 110, Mischief Night, a 2013 American horror film directed by Richard Schenkman and written by Schenkman, Jesse Baguette, and Eric D. Wilkinson. It focuses on a young girl who suffers from psychosomatic blindness being terrorized by a hooded killer. It's not trying to reinvent the wheel, it doesn't necessarily stand out amongst home invasion films, but I think the character's blindness does give it a slight edge. Noelle Coet does a terrific job in the role and portrays a young blind girl very well. I feel like it stays away from tropes. It doesn't make her superhuman with advanced senses. She's just aware of her surroundings like a person like her has had to learn to be. She's not a superhero because she knows someone else is in the room. If you close your eyes, you can feel when someone enters a room. Plus Plenty gave her clues, so it's all logical. Yes, she gets her sight back at the end, but the film was clever to not make it too much of a cliche of she just happened to get it back at the right time. Actually, a lot has gone wrong and she did manage to kick ass while blind, so there's that. But we see pieces here and there where really her journey to getting her sight back began at the start of the film during her therapy session, where she basically had a breakthrough. It's just that she doesn't realize it until close to the end of the film for timing's sake. But at least it's not out of nowhere. The plot has been working up to it, so that helps. Characters don't follow too many slasher cliches, though it does a few things we've seen before. The fake decoy, the accomplice, which weren't hard to spot. Only things I disagree with is the accomplice reveal was pointless. I don't know why the dad was kept alive aside from convenience, and the killer's outfits were literally stolen from Alice, sweet Alice. Masks and yellow rain slickers, I mean, come on, it's been done and better. Honestly, I was surprised this was a legit slasher because the opening came off as far more of a comedy horror. Nevertheless, I actually really enjoyed this film. Number 111, Monkey Shines, also known as Monkey Shines, An Experiment in Fear, a 1988 American psychological horror film written and directed by George A. Romero, based on the 1983 novel of the same name by Michael Stewart. It follows a young athlete who becomes a paralyzed quadriplegic and develops a bond with an intelligent service monkey named Ella, who becomes homicidal after she is injected with an experimental serum of human brain tissue. As crazy as this is, I actually loved it. Monkey business aside, I think it was a very good depiction of many issues faced by those living with paralysis or some form of handicap. In this case, we have an athlete who prided himself on his physical abilities suddenly becomes a quadriplegic. His entire world has been turned upside down. People expect him to be happy and grateful to be alive, but he's severely depressed and attempts suicide. His nurse is the nurse from hell. His mother is very controlling, and this enforces the feeling that his independence has been taken from him. He's trying to live as normal as he can, but things that used to be normal aren't normal anymore. He suffers mood swings and angry outbursts, all to be expected given the psychological trauma he is going through. His carers suffer their own violent outbursts as well, and while theirs were not well scripted, they are logical. If you have ever been a carer, which I have, then you know the mental and physical stress it puts on you. Add verbal abuse and you do reach breaking points often, and it's not your fault. On top of that, he finds out his condition might be reversible, but an egomaniac of a doctor didn't care enough to check. So yeah, that would devastate you to think maybe you didn't have to be suffering. Or fuck, you could have been like this forever. On top of that, you find out who your real friends are. His girlfriend dumps him because he can't walk and shacks up with his surgeon. That really plunges the knife in. While it demonstrates the struggles of a handicapped individual, it also demonstrates the strength and ability many have to adapt and live full lives. On the subject of Ella the monkey, as homicidal as she may be, she was so beautiful and adorable, it was hard to not fall in love with her. And in a way, she is a victim too, which makes sense as to why the two characters form a connection. She's taken from her home and turned into a lab experiment, then made to look after a human and become human in a way, then witnessing and embracing human behavior, many of it bad, and as a result, she becomes a monster. She wasn't born a monster, she was made one. But humans then hate her for what they made her into at no fault of her own. No one takes responsibility. They just see her as the monster and evil, not realizing it's just a reflection of the worst of humankind. They tried to make an animal human, and what came out were the traits they denied were theirs. There's a lot to take from this film. Number 112, Monstrum, a 2018 South Korean period action film directed by Hyo Jong-ho and written by Jong-ho and Hyo Dam, set in 1527 during King Jeongjong's reign, where plague is spreading in Joseon and rumors are rife that a mysterious vicious creature called Monstrum is roaming around the country. I had a lot of fun with this. The characters are all well crafted, written and performed. You want to see how every story with each plays out. You are very invested in each. You hate the ones you meant to and love the ones you meant to. The action scenes were a lot of fun. I was loving them all. I don't think I've ever seen a Korean film I disliked. I hope I never do. I am noticing though, of all the Korean films I've seen, all the ones that are period pieces, regardless of whether it's a film about zombies like in Rampant or monsters like in this, they all feature themes about politics. Methinks Koreans don't like politics or politicians much. They all feature a king who is either ignorant or a dictator or both, being a victim of a coup at the hands of his own cabinet, where they plot to overthrow him to the point they either fabricate stories of a deadly plague or use an existing one to make him look bad, and in many cases it's orchestrated by one of the king's ministers who wants to take over and be king and will burn the city down to do so. They almost all seem to feature this angle. I'm fine with it. I mean, it certainly works and is believable and poetic how the bad guys are ultimately destroyed by the subjects of their lies and deceit, so that's great. But in this film, it's weird. The Prime Minister previously led all the other ministers into overthrowing the previous king and putting a new king on the throne. Now they're once again trying to get this king out of the way so that the Prime Minister can take the throne. Why didn't he just do that the first time? Either way, still a great film. Number 113, Motel Hell, a 1980 comedy horror film directed by Kevin Connor and written by Robert Caff, Stephen Charles Jaffe, Tim Citrello, and Frank Cotolo. The plot follows farmer, butcher, motel manager, and meat entrepreneur Vincent Smith, who traps travelers and harvests them for his human sausages. Honestly, I thought this was a lot of fun. It takes a lot of elements from established horror films and just gives them a slight twist, and it's purely for entertainment. I think the characters are fun, the story is an absolute hoot, and certainly fun to watch play out. I think the whole image of the dead rising from the grave for revenge is fun, even if they're not dead. Even some of the nice characters are revealed to not be that, and watching eco-friendly cannibals either way made my afternoon super entertaining. I'd recommend this. Number 114, Murder Party, a 2007 American horror comedy film written and directed by Jeremy Saulnier. A random invitation to a Halloween party leads a man into the hands of a rogue collective intent on murdering him for the sake of their art, sparking a bloodbath of mishap, mayhem, and hilarity. This exists. That's really all I can say about it. It exists, and I don't think it should. It is neither comedy or horror. It's as pretentious as its characters. It feels like it thinks it's self-aware, but it really isn't. I couldn't even hate this. This film was so dull, it made me feel less than nothing. I felt like I was sucked into a black hole until it was over. And number 115, My Soul to Take, a 2010 American slasher film written and directed by Wes Craven. In it, a serial killer returns to his hometown to stalk 7 children who share the same birthday as the date he was allegedly put to rest. A man steps away from films for 16 years and this is what he came back with. Christ on a cracker, this was not good. To his credit, the performances were good, but my compliments end there. The plot is incredibly convoluted. It tries to do and establish a million different things and doesn't flesh out or explain a single one of them. I was so confused it gave me a headache. It has like a dozen reveals and each is poorly placed and so rushed you're not even sure if it was explained correctly, and you have to spend the next few minutes trying to catch up, which puts you behind on everything else. From the opening, I thought this was a comedy slasher. By the end, I still believed it was a comedy slasher. I'm very shocked it wasn't. I have no idea what this film was or what it was going for because it never really explained anything. Wes was better than this, but hey, at least he enjoyed it. And yay! That's another recap done. Oh, yeah, yeah. Whoop, 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 whoop. I'm nearly done. I'm nearly done. I've just got 3 more recaps to go? I don't know. But anyway, you know the drill. If you've watched these recaps before, you know how this works. If this is your first time, well, here's how it works. If I have talked about any films today that you have seen, then please comment below and tell me what you thought of those films. If I have talked about films that have piqued your interest that you have not seen before, then also comment down below and tell me about those films. What piqued your interest? What exactly? Why is it you want to check them out? So, I'm delirious. My throat hurts so bad. So that is it for today's video. Thank you as always to everybody who has watched, supported this video, supports my channel, all that good stuff. I'm gonna call it a day. Thank you as always to my amazing patrons who support all of my work and my projects. You guys are the bomb! Oh, I have no idea what I'm saying right now. I think I'm running on autopilot. But anyway, I'm done dilly. I'm gonna go diddly-o. I don't know any idea of the words that are coming out of my mouth right now. So I'm gonna go. So, nice seeing you guys. And I'll see you in the next one.